Is everybody ready to go? We only have a few minutes left to close it out for the day. I know you've had an amazing day of content. You've been hearing all about technologies, whether they've been Ansible or virtual machines and OpenShift or some other technology, whether it be InstructLab and other things. And now we're going to have another guy talking about this AI stuff one more time. I don't have any hats to throw out this time. But I'm hoping it's going to be fun. We have some live demonstrations, which, of course, may go completely sideways. We'll have to find out how that works out. But I just want to give you a quick little introduction to this slide right here. This is a QR code to the slide deck. It's a Google Doc. If you have a Google account, it should let you write in. So use your Gmail account and get access to this Google Doc right now. You don't have to follow along with me, but someone always says, hey, can I get a copy of the slides? And we're going to just get that out of the way very early. So go ahead and grab a copy of that real quick. There'll be another QR code later where I might have you actually play along with me with a little interactive chatbot we'll work with maybe. Now, one thing I'll just mention quickly, the slides actually are normally designed by my wife. Often when I'm going out and giving a presentation, she'll decide, okay, you're going to go to Poland. We're going to do some really interesting things that have kind of a Polish context, or if you're going to go out to South America. And she's done some amazing designs for me all throughout the years. But just last Friday night, I kind of said, I'm going over to Stockholm, and I'm going to give this presentation. It's going to be about AI. And I said, would you be interested in using ChatGPT to create graphic designs? And she had never thought of that. She had not tried it before. I said, just install the application on your phone and ask it to create images and see where you get. And she was a little skeptical at first, but she installed the app on her phone, and she then stayed up the entire night. I apparently went to sleep, slept all throughout the night, and I got up the next morning, she was still on it. And she'd been creating images the entire night. She had that much fun doing it. So you're going to see some of her designs throughout this presentation that were created through ChatGPT, along with some other things. Now, I want to try one experiment real quick. Let's see if this works. Okay, let's really get this going. Please provide an effusive introduction of Burr Sutter at Red Hat here at a technical conference live right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, oops, I was just getting in. Okay, starting over. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the dynamic Burr Sutter from Red Hat, here to share his insights live from this exciting technical conference.
Can you do it in Swedish?
Självklart. Mina damer och herrar, var goda att välkomna den dynamiska Burr Sutter från Red Hat, här för att dela sina insikter live från denna spännande tekniska konferens.
And you get the text transcription as well. Okay. So that's a new feature, of course, of ChatGPT. And I'm not going to be encouraging you to use ChatGPT except in one way, and we'll see that towards the end. But let's go ahead and dive in because we have a lot of ground to cover in a short period of time. As I mentioned, my wife, who normally helps me with all my design work, had some really good times actually working with Swedish Vikings, steampunk Swedish Vikings. And if you get access to the slides, you'll actually see the prompts used to create these images in the speaker notes. So we went in there and tried to add them all. So we're going to talk about large language models, and we're going to talk about it for the next several minutes, but I have several demonstrations I want to show you, and I want to make sure we have time for that. Now, this is an incredible image all by itself, I think. And the fact that you could basically just give it a simple prompt and then imagine this new world and give you this image, I think is pretty powerful. Don't necessarily know what the enterprise context for this is, maybe if you have to create marketing content, but it's certainly fun for people who give presentations. Now, last year when I was here, I gave you a quick introduction to a previous presentation that I'd done for JFocus a few years earlier. In other words, I came up and told the audience a little bit about myself, both at JFocus like 6 years ago and last year as well, and I said, I'm actually a very strange individual. I was actually born in Hawaii, but grew up in Alabama, and went to high school in Hawaii. And so I just thought I'd throw up a little picture of what people think of Hawaii here. And some people found that very interesting. And a lot of people come up to me at the end of the presentation and said, here in Sweden, we don't ever hear about people from Hawaii. And I can almost guarantee you don't hear about people from Hawaii and Alabama. that is an interesting combination. Here's my high school graduation photo. One of the things you do in high school in Hawaii, when you graduate, you give people leis, flowers, and things like that. So you can see we're buried with flowers there. So these are some of my best friends when I was in high school, and that was a long time ago. Okay? And there's where the high school sits up on the mountaintop. So everything in Hawaii is basically kind of just a little bit of beach and a lot of mountain, if you know what I mean, if you've ever been there. And so the high school actually sat up above Pearl Harbor, and you could see down to Pearl Harbor from some of my classrooms, and you could also kind of see out where Waikiki and Diamond Head were. And I told this story last year, and I kind of painted that verbal picture for people. And I thought, well, I wonder if ChatGPT can also make this real. Okay? And so I asked ChatGPT, can you take a young 16-year-old half-Asian boy sitting in front of a computer learning computer technology for the first time in a classroom in Hawaii where he can stare out the window and see Waikiki and Diamond Head? It did take 4 tries or so to get this image the way I wanted it, but this kind of blew my mind. This is a vision I have in my head that I've had for 40 years. And ChatGPT helped me make a picture out of it. And all I had to do is just give it the right words. So I think that's actually very powerful, and I thought you might enjoy that picture, but we'll keep going. Now, one key element about being a programmer in Hawaii when you're 16 years old in the early or the mid-'80s is you learn a secret superpower. You as a software person sit down at the keyboard, and you type in these arcane commands into that computer, and it basically will say, hello, your name. In my case, it said, hello, Burr. And I was hooked because I created something from nothing. I used a magical superpower that I didn't know I had, that I could type in stuff on a keyboard, and out the other end comes something that actually has a purpose. In this case, telling me hello. But it didn't exist before I typed it in, because there was not another Burr typing on a computer at that point in time. So I knew it was unique and original. But that's a powerful concept also. And all of you have this secret superpower as well. You can actually type arcane commands on a keyboard, whether it be a Bash shell script, a piece of Python code, a Java application, an Ansible playbook, and something new now exists in this world. And that's powerful. And very few people have that superpower. Let me say one other little thing about this thing for Hawaii Connection, though. I learned how to program in Hawaii in high school. I went to college after that and thought I would be a theater major. Can you imagine? Yeah, it doesn't fit me at all, does it? I was a performer, I was a gymnast, I was a cheerleader, I did the stunts, I did all kinds of things. But I actually had to call my grandparents up because a friend of mine said, you know what, that computer thing actually pays money. And I'm like, I know the computer thing, give me money. And this is how I was thinking. This is about 1988, okay? So we're talking a long time ago. This is actually a picture of my son. Because one of the things we do when we go back to Hawaii, the family, and visit family there, one of the things you have to do is pick coffee. Because that's how my family, my generations of my family grew up picking coffee. My mother grew up picking coffee. So when I called up and said, could I have a little money, my grandparents, could I have a little bit of money for this thing called a computer? My coffee-picking grandparents, which made all their money picking coffee, didn't do computers, right? Coffee picking, by the way, is you pick every little bean one at a time, right? And put in a little basket on your belt. My son actually was wearing my grandfather's basket at the time. You can't see it there. Well, I guess you can kind of see it briefly. So that's not me, that is my son. But I make that point because they sent me a check so I could buy my IBM PS2 386SX. And that changed my entire life. So I owe my entire career to coffee, just to kind of give that context. I'm really going to run out of time. I got to get going here. All right, so just some other historical context. I love the concept of a little history lesson. Back in the early 80s, we actually built applications that had a character user interface, a CHUI. It had a VT100, VT220, 3270, 5250. It was green screen, it was amber screen, and it required 3 humans to operate it. And I don't mean operations, I mean use it as users. Because in my top bar there, you see a little person working as a plant manager. They needed to order new product. They basically would call their sales rep up at the vendor they ordered that product from, and the sales rep would basically type it out on a typewriter or really hand write it, put it through a fax machine. The fax would go to a data entry operator, and the data entry operator would put that order in the system. That's the way it was in the 80s. It was too complicated to teach a sales rep and definitely a customer how to use a green screen application, but you could have a specialized person, the data entry. Okay, and it might have looked something like this. ChatGPT helped me visualize the concept of VT100. Not exactly right, but not bad either for a green screen application. Now, in the 90s, we had the concept of the GUI, the graphical user interface. And this was a massive shift in how we built software. We used to have green screen applications where the user had to follow a certain path from field to field by hitting the tab key or using F function keys on the keyboard. And they couldn't skip around. Then we introduced the concept of windows. And they had this thing called a mouse. And the user could click there and click here and click here. That broke programmers' brains. How in the world did they skip all my validation logic? They just skipped all your fields, too, and they hit save, and they saved a blank record to the database. This happened all the time for new programmers in the 90s. So that was a paradigm shift, but again, you can see we eliminated the person. The plant manager who has to make an order still calls their sales rep, but because we gave them a GUI and a big laptop that looked like that, we thought the sales rep could do the data entry themselves. And some companies did that, and I worked with companies that did this. And then this might have been Windows 95 that made this happen, right? We had desktop computers. Now, we went to the web in the early 2000s, and the idea of the web was very powerful. What if the actual customer could put an order in themselves directly into a web-based system? We didn't have to install software on their desktop computer. They could use a browser, and they could put an order in themselves. We didn't have to call a sales rep. We didn't have to use a data entry operator. We could self-serve. This was powerful. Now, you're probably thinking, this is what we do. But I can tell you back in 1999, we didn't know we would be this way. And I can absolutely assure you in 1996, I was convincing people the internet was not a bad, evil thing. The World Wide Web was not going to steal your credit card. Everyone certainly thought that at the time. I had multiple people tell me, oh, I'm scared of that web thing. I heard it steals your credit card. And I'm not kidding. Now, some of you are old enough to know, yeah, I was worried about that too. Not too long before that, we were worried about ATMs stealing our money also. That was back in the 70s more than anything else. But when any paradigm shift happens, okay, in our world, there are less humans involved and fear. That's two things guaranteed. Whenever we innovate within our organization, within our enterprise, within our big global world as IT people, we eliminate jobs because we automate them, and we have fear associated with that. I make this point because we're definitely living that world right now when it comes to AI. But this was the web. Shortly after that, we did the mobile thing. And the nice thing is the customer was untethered from their desktop. They could basically go to their mobile device while walking around the plant and put an order in on a mobile phone. Wow, game-changing. Did you ever imagine we would have a supercomputer in our pocket back in 2005? Of course not. But then the iPhone happened. And if you go back and watch that original demonstration by Steve Jobs where he showed you the concept of, I'm going to give you three things, a music player, an internet device, and a phone. And he goes, I'm going to give you a phone, an internet device, and a music player. And he keeps saying that until the audience goes, it's one device. And the world's mind was blown, okay? And the world changed. So these things happen. And going forward, we're going to have the concept of bots. We're going to have the concept of large language models and AIs where it'll just do everything in an automated way. Why does a human have to enter an order when the hardware and the software and everything else knows that that transaction needs to occur? Let it occur automatically. So just a little history lesson there. We'll have a couple more of these. But the future of user interface, the future of human interaction with computers is going to change, okay? Now, someone actually saw this slide from me in yesterday's keynote, and so I thought I'd bring it back. Here's a challenge for all of us in IT, specifically for those of us in software development. In the early 60s and 70s, it was easy. We had a simple programming language called COBOL. It was only batch. It wasn't user interactive. It had a very simple file structure that we could read and write data from. Life was super easy, and it was grand. But as time went on, you can see we had to learn new skills. Event-driven programming, where the user could jump all over the screen, and we had to learn Visual Basic and Power Builder. We had to figure out what a drop-down list box was, and that was pretty mind-blowing. Oh my God, look at that thing going up and down. And if you're a Power Builder person, there's a drop-down data window. Wow, game-changing. data windows. But that was all like in the 90s as an example. Then we had to learn HTML and Ajax, and then we had to figure out all the stuff we're doing with microservices and different types of databases. And you can see the explosion of things that people have to learn gets harder. This matters because I'm telling you now, I'm already overloading you with new information. And I appreciate that, and it's something we do have to work through. The big win, though, is if we can actually take part of that load and put it on a platform engineering team. We'll see a little bit about platform engineering here in the presentation and the demonstrations. One last little thing I want to give you in this little segment, though, is you remember the concept of pair programming, and if you practice Agile, right? You're supposed to have another programmer sit side by side with you, and you work together to do pair programming. Well, ChatGPT was able to give me a nice picture of that. I've worked this way with another programmer before, and it was incredibly powerful. Very productive. We actually cranked out twice the amount of code of vastly higher quality, built a whole system this way, and it actually worked really well. So it's trickier in a post-COVID world where we don't necessarily work face-to-face or work cheek-to-cheek, as we did in this case, right? Code cheek to cheek. But I know a lot of people are worried about these new AI tools that help you generate code. Are we introducing the Terminator into our code? Some people worry about that. I'm here to tell you it's not Terminator. It's actually more like Clippy. If anyone remembers Clippy. We're going to get a nice, helpful little assistant there that's super cute. But that's just kind of a joke. But just thinking about that when it comes to these tools, they're there to assist us and help us build things ever faster, okay? The concept of platform engineering, I have these slides out of order apparently, but a lot of those things right there will be taken by another team, by another platform team, or even an AI that will help us automate these things. We'll come back to that in a second. If you have questions, I'll see you afterwards. But now, let's get into this right here, because this is the meat and potatoes of the presentation. Then I have a big idea to talk to you about also. When it comes to your evolutionary journey, when it comes to you taking advantage of these new things called large language models, and keep in mind, depending how long you've been in this business, you were very skeptical of the relational database. I was there. I saw the people go, oh, I don't know what to do with that relational thingy or that Oracle stuff. No, not for me. Okay? You might have been very skeptical of when we introduced the concept of a message broker. Well, isn't my data going to get lost? How can I trust my data to that message broker thing? You might have been very skeptical of virtualization. No, we only run on bare metal hardware. I don't want that virtual layer. It might lose my data. And so that's the nature of technology adoption, right? We're always very skeptical. I can't say the word. We're very suspicious of it, and then we kind of adopt it. And in this case, this is the adoption journey you should be thinking about. You have to master the prompt, the string that goes in, and of course, data that comes out. I'm going to send a string in, and hopefully it's going to respond. And maybe it'll introduce Bersutter in Swedish as an example. We'll see more examples of this. But then you got to understand it's conversational. It's a chat-like experience. It doesn't have to be a chat bot, but it is conversational. String goes in, string comes out. English goes in, English comes out. Swedish goes in, Swedish comes out. Then you have the concept of retrieval augmented generation, the RAG, right? That actually introduces a separate database and vectorized data. And you search your local database before asking the model with additional context now for its answer. And I'll show you a couple examples of RAG. Then you have the concept of tools. So this is where you actually hand the model a tool, and it invokes your custom code. It can interact with your Java code, your Python code, your JavaScript code, all based on what the prompt says it ought to do. And I'll show you an example of that. Then you might get into the more advanced areas of fine-tuning and alignment, actually training the model. In our earlier presentation on the keynote stage this morning, we talked about InstructLab and how it can be used for fine-tuning and alignment, changing the model itself, not RAG, not tools, but a different way of going about it. And then the ultimate goal is to eventually get into an agentic framework where it can have some form of planning and orchestration, where multiple models might be netted together into an overall business transaction. I want to stop briefly, though, and show you just a couple quick demos of this idea because I think it's very helpful to see these things. So here's an example of chat, okay? And it might be just a little chat bot like you see here. And I can ask it questions. Why is the sky blue? So Q&A is a big thing, along with things like summarization, helping you create emails, reviewing all this text, summarizing this text and making it more concise. Let's see here. Maybe I lost my connection. So let's double check that. All right. Sometimes I have a connection timeout. Why is the sky blue? We'll try that again. Try to get that to answer. And there we go. This is my Chuck Norris one. We'll see that in a moment. But if you're familiar with Chuck Norris, the legend, not Sylvester Stallone, not Arnold Schwarzenegger, a real karate expert that fought Bruce Lee in a movie, and Chuck Norris actually has some great jokes about it. So that's an example of just interactive chat prompt, right? Then there's the concept of retrieval augmented generation. So let's say, what is OpenShift AI? And I'm going to ask the question here, and I'm going to ask the question here. And you'll see there's a distinct difference. One basically says, let me go directly against the untrained model, the generic model, and ask it a question. And the other basically says, let me augment the prompt through retrieval augmented generation as a pattern. And now I have contextualized the question for the user, given a more specific answer, and provided links to more information. So that's an example of RAG, right? And so if I can do something like how to configure a NVIDIA GPU, if I ask the question of a generic model, all right, I'm going to get a generic answer based on its training data from the internet. And if I ask it of a model that has now a RAG, retrieval augmented generation, in front of it, I'll get a specific OpenShift answer along with maybe code snippets or along with, again, links to specific documentation. Again, contextualize the conversation back and forth. That's what you do with retrieval augmented generation. And I'll show you one little thing, and we'll come back to some of this in a second, with, for tools, right? So here's a quick example of a tool. This is a technology called Camel. It's basically defined as YAML. All right, camel, YAML, it's kind of fun. But all it is an integration technology where you can basically specify, I want to make A talk to B, right? So I want one endpoint to talk to another endpoint. Helps you communicate across HTTP transactions is one example, but databases, Kafka brokers, Kafka topics, all that will work. And here's a fun one. Let's see here I'm going to go just show you just quickly what it does at the end result. I am planning a weekend in Paris. What is the weather? All right, and if I got that about right, it should come back having hit the weather API, because large language models don't know what today's weather is. They were trained months ago. They don't know what today's weather is, but using a tool, it can reach out to the weather API using the camel structure you saw over here as an example, right? And you can see this is specifically the weather API. But the model interpreted the text the user provided, realized that I had the word Paris in there, which gives it a place. It looks up the long and lat, right, and sends that on to the weather API to get the information. So very powerful concepts, and just relatively simple to do. You just have to imagine what you're going to do with this natural language processing tool that you have with a large language model. So we'll come back to some more of that in a second. I want to show you some more things, but I just want to give you a little taste of the power of large language models. And again, if you're thinking, well, I'm still skeptical, I still can't say the word, suspicious of this large language model AI technology, just remember, we all are. That's how we enter into any technological change as humans. We look at it and go, I'm not sure if I'm good with that. We saw the cloud, okay? We saw that thing called AWS, and they did EC2 and S3. This is 2006, 2007. We were like, I don't know about that. I'm not putting my data over there, and I'm not running their virtual machines. That's just how we operated. And now we kind of do that by default, right, for a lot of different situations. Okay, so I asked ChatGPT to give us an evolutionary concept. My wife did in this case, and they gave us one of those, which I think is pretty awesome. The Swedish Viking is the ultimate form of evolution. She was including things like Swedish Vikings, so that kind of made it fun. Or maybe this one. This one's actually pretty strong, you know. Think of the evolutionary chart again with the Swedish flag in the background. She did stay up all Friday night having fun with these ideas. And maybe you like this one. I like this one where the Swedish Viking is now sitting at the computer keyboard working like on a treadmill or something. But yeah, another example of what this can do. Okay? Let's talk quickly about another concept, and that is there's an SDLC and an MDLC, a software development lifecycle and a model development lifecycle. This is where I can write code, do git, commit, git, push, make changes to the code independently of the model, which has its own life cycle, where there might be data scientists that are training it, there might be people who are augmenting it, there might be people who are fine-tuning it, and all those different operations that occur around that ML ops pipeline, that ML ops life cycle, are separate from the software side. So there's a DevOps life cycle and an ML ops life cycle. There's a DevSecOps life cycle and an MLSecOps life cycle. You're going to hear these terms going forward because in the machine learning community, they're saying things like these now. MLOps, MLSecOps. We have to do the same things, similar things at least, in those two worlds. And in the demo I'll show you here in a second, I will show you how you bring all that together into one seamless solution. Okay? Now, the cloud native journey we've been on has been pretty intense for quite some time, but do know we got into this cloud game in a big way, and we got into Kubernetes with Linux containers and Spring Boot, and all that was defined as microservices as of 2015. It's been a while. And what's cool about that, we launched OpenShift on Kubernetes, showed the world we could launch 1,000+ pods live on stage at Red Hat Summit in 2016. I was part of that demonstration, but we also showed you mobile applications and IoT and how sensor devices could feed into a message broker, and you could do real-time data streaming analysis on that and triangulate a person's location at the conference by simply using Bluetooth technology and Raspberry Pis. So we did a lot in that particular demo, but I use that as a benchmark. That's when a lot of this all came together. Since that point, though, we started talking about DevOps principles. We started talking about things like, team topologies accelerate. You see Argo CD there as a powerful change to the Kubernetes community back in 2018. I know some of you are still like, well, we might adopt it in 2025. It's been there for a while, and it's amazing capability. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But you can see Backstage came from Spotify, and they basically said, you know what, there's only 3 reasons we did Backstage at Spotify. One, we're hiring people all the time, and the new person who just started is slowing down the experienced person by asking them all kinds of questions. Could we just write everything down, and when the new person gets hired, give them a URL and tell them to go read? And that's where Backstage came from. So we'll see a little bit of Backstage here in a minute. But the idea of platform engineering and people who build for platforms and platforms for other developers, being that developer's developer, all really came to a head back in 2021. So what's happened since 2021? This AI thing, okay? So one thing you need to do is test your LLMs. Whenever you decide I'm going to go download a model from Hugging Face and put it on my local laptop, like we talked about this morning with Podman Desktop AI Lab, test it real quick. Ask it some questions. And you need to be a subject matter expert in the questions because it will always provide a nice answer. It just may be wrong. It may be a hallucination. So I tend to ask it, who is Burr Sutter? I'm a subject matter expert in Burr Sutter. I know that person. And in this case, I'm apparently an amazing evangelist speaker in the Python community. I'm a Java champion. I'm not a Python person per se. I got a little Python code in my demos. So that's not me. And I don't work for Anaconda. I work for Red Hat. Okay? This was a really good one. I'm a business person. I'm an investor. I basically work in California. That's kind of fun. I'm the first African American to be inducted into the Hollywood Walk of Fame. I like that one, actually. That makes me way cooler than I actually am. Okay? I'm a stock car racing driver. Oh, better yet, okay? I'm an American voice actor. Here's the point that you want to test these large language models. Every model from every vendor you download and try, you're going to get different answers from. So if you pick Llama, it's going to be different than Mistral. If you pick Mistral, it's going to be different than Granite. If you pick Granite, it's going to be different than Quinn. I have them all running in my cluster right now. I can show you that they're all different. And depending on the parameter size you pick, 7 billion parameters or 70 billion parameters, you get different answers. And depending on the quantization level, you'll get different answers. So there's 3 factors that go into the fact that its behavior is going to be different. So you got to factor that into your choices and your curation and your testing. It becomes really important. Now, let me give you just kind of a wild idea. You might be thinking, okay, this guy talks too fast. He showed us a bunch of stuff. I'm not sure how this whole thing hangs together. I'm not sure how this whole thing hangs together, too. But I had an idea. I actually spent a lot of time this year with a major health crisis, just so you know, not to get overly personal about it. But I lost a lot of months this year between hospital visits and hospitalization. And when I got out of that mode, I wasn't very functional, but I could listen to podcasts and watch YouTube videos. And I was paying attention to Bill Gates for some reason at the time, and he gave me an idea, okay? But ideas are powerful, and one thing I want to talk about briefly is the idea of an idea. Just the fact that we sat here together and you've seen the same images, you're looking at the same image right now, and you have heard the same words, the picture in your head is unique per individual. It is human nature. We all have our filters, we all have our biases, we all have our historical, cultural changes that are part of our family and the world we grew up in, and therefore things are different. So it's actually really hard to get an idea to go throughout an organization, because every time someone says something, the other person has a different image in their head. You just cannot really overcome that. You have to work really hard to address it. And of course, there's this fable about the blind men and the elephant, if you've ever heard that one before. It comes out of India, right? So these different people who have a blindfold on or can't see different things because they don't understand the whole context, they don't understand the perspective, and they definitely don't communicate well with each other. I'm telling you about ideas because I'm going to give you a really wild idea, okay? So it's really hard to get on the same page, it's really hard to have the same epiphany, and it's really hard to have such a shared idea that we can spread it throughout an organization to all the people that are needed to have the idea before we can adopt a new technology. Like, we're ready to look at containers for the first time in this organization. We're ready to think about moving off VMware. We're ready to think about maybe something like a Kafka broker or Kafka as a service. We're ready to do something like maybe you look at a NoSQL database or a large language model, right? These ideas take time, and I'm just kind of warning you about that, because here's an even wilder idea, okay? ChatGPT helped me with this idea here or there. So listen to Bill Gates when I was in the middle of trying to just recover from my second surgery, I think it was, and I heard this story, and I kind of blew my mind. Now, it actually starts with this statement. Someone asked him about ChatGPT, and he said it was kind of mind-blowing. Kind of like that, pretty nonchalant. It's like, okay, kind of mind-blowing, kind of an interesting thing. Then someone followed up. Another interviewer said, we heard you said it was mind-blowing. Was it more mind-blowing than Xerox PARC? And for those people who haven't been around that long in the industry, Xerox PARC back in the 70s created the concepts, innovated and invented the concept of a window and a mouse, and that idea that you could flip windows around on a computer and a graphical user interface. And they demoed it to a guy named Steve Jobs and a guy named Bill Gates. And guess who actually benefited from that? Not Xerox PARC. But they asked him, was it bigger than Xerox PARC? Yes. It was bigger than the graphical user interface I saw at Xerox PARC. Obviously, that moment reshaped everything we did at Microsoft, created Apple. It changed the world from a demo in a little organization that did research. And this is bigger than that. So that got my attention because I knew the Xerox PARC story. He says, obviously, graphic user interface is clearly less impactful than the change we're about to see. Because what we've seen is an advancement of technology well beyond the graphical user interface, right? He goes on, he just gushes about this, how it can take AP exams, how it can basically write a poem, how it can actually write a condolence letter to someone's father, person whose father just died. He just goes on and on and on. But he says one other little thing that really got my attention. Because the interviewers keep pestering him with like the same question. Okay, same question. Are you sure it's that big a deal? Or maybe it's not that big a deal. And well, can people really learn this technology? What if humans can't learn this technology, can't understand it? And he has his one kind of simple statement really got my attention. I'm not teaching you 59 menus and dialogues. You're going to type what you want and get the answers you want. I think almost everybody can do that. And for people who don't type very well, they can speak and hear. And that really got my attention. Basically, Bill's saying this is fundamentally game-changing. And so I had to think about that for a second. Is it fundamentally game-changing for all things we do in terms of user interface design? And I think it is. So let me give you my wild idea. For some of you, it will make sense. For some of you, like, that guy is not right. Okay, and I respect that. But think of a call service operator. Think of that situation where you've ever had to call into customer service. I travel a lot. I fly a lot. I call the Delta hotline a lot. I'm sorry, but my flight was delayed. I need to catch the next flight. I got to make a change because the customer meeting that I'm supposed to show up at moved, and I need to, change my flight. I lost my baggage. Where did it go? You left me stranded over here. I call them a lot. And I've even had to call them in some like James Bond kind of scenarios. Like I'm in a taxi flying to the train station. When I get to the train station, I need an Uber to meet me. And then I need to catch the next plane from Paris to the US. And then if I make that in time, I got to jog through the entire airport to make the next flight to catch home. These are true stories. So I would even keep them in an earbud sometimes as they walked me through this as I'm jogging from place to place. And so I always realized something when I talked to them so much. They actually struggled with serving me as a customer. You could tell they were fighting their software. They were looking at different screens. They were logging into different applications. They were talking to different systems. As a matter of fact, multiple times they were like, I'm sorry, sir, but I got to call a colleague. And I got to ask them this question, and I'll get, just please hold on the line, and I'll get you the answer after I talk to my colleague. And sometimes they just put us into a three-way call. Can I bring my colleague into the call? And the three of us would talk about the problem I was having. These are very real situations. And I thought, there's got to be a better way. And it occurred to me, here's the real problem. The person who's trying to answer the question on the hotline has a fixed user experience. The programmer set the fields on the screen a certain way. If the field that they need is not there, then they are stuck. They either have to click all over the place, 59 menus and dialogues, like Bill Gates said. He was actually talking about Photoshop at that moment, by the way, in his example. He goes on to talk about it. Or they just are completely stuck and they have to phone somebody to answer the customer question. So this is known as swivel chair integration. It's actually a big problem in big enterprise software. You've used big enterprise software that you can't figure out how to navigate either, and you're a software professional. They make me use all kinds of stuff at Red Hat that I can't understand in some cases. So what if we reimagine the way software was designed, okay? What if we actually had a tool that we could basically speak English to the application and it just give us what we want? We actually defined this back in the 70s for people who've been around long enough. It was called SQL, SQL, Structured English Query Language. Yeah, that didn't work out, did it? But it was originally built for that. Some people should be able to learn, average business people, select splat from customer, right? Where customer ID equals, 1094 or whatever. It didn't actually work. But what if it could work now? What if we actually could have an interface that's so dynamic that when I actually just say, hey, give me Burr Sutter's profile, every other thing you see here is dynamically rendered by a large language model, by an AI that's basically giving me the optimized user experience based on the context that I have right now. Here's Burr Sutter's information. We know his account number. He's a loyal diamond status, a million miler, right? Here's his upcoming flights, because more often than not, when he's calling in, he's got a flight that's going sideways, so just show me the flights he's coming up at. What are his current issues? We know he's got issues all the time. Just tell me what the last 10 reported issues are. But a fully dynamic user experience. As a matter of fact, if I drill down on those lost issues, I can say, hey, just tell me about the most recent case logs from flight delays and flight-related issues. Just that way I can get a sense for how unhappy this customer is. If I wanted to, the AI could actually just tell me with a big blinking sign. And here's the part that's kind of interesting about this. In HTML and JavaScript land, this is very easy to do. The only thing that's actually hard is how to integrate with the back end. But the front end, in an HTML world, is perfectly ready for this. So what if I had another prompt that basically said, hey, what are the upcoming flights for Burr Sutter? What are the different ways to connect from airport to airport? Because I asked that question a lot. If I go from here to there, how do I actually fly into Botswana? Was a recent one, because I did take a trip to Botswana recently. These are hard questions to answer with a customer service person. But if it had a fully dynamic experience that was based on English or Swedish or your natural language, you could dynamically render the screen. Okay? How many times has Burr been upgraded in the last 12 months? Because that's what the customer just asked for. Can I just quickly say what I want and get a response back from the system? So this idea of a fully dynamic user experience around enterprise applications will mean that you don't have to click 59 menus and dialogues to dig into the system to find that the field you actually want there was never put there by the programmer. And if you need that data, you don't actually have to wait 3 months for the programmer to add the screen that you need. Okay? So this is just an idea that I want to kind of put you guys on, because I do think we can reimagine our future as it relates to AI technology. Okay, now let's show you some more demos. The dog and pony show is an informal American term that basically says we're going to show you some fun stuff. And of course, I asked ChatGPT to give me a dog and pony show. That one's pretty powerful, right? This one's also pretty awesome. My wife did this one as an example. Again, she liked the Swedish Viking thing a lot. Okay, so let's give you a little more demo. As a matter of fact, let's go in here and do this demo right now. You saw those applications I had deployed. How did I get them deployed? I'm going to show you Red Hat Developer Hub, that backstage, that idea that Spotify had that said if I have a new employee, I want to get them ramped up to speed as quickly as possible. So if they hire onto this organization today, I'll just send them an email with welcome, thank you for joining our company. Here's your URL and your user ID and password. And that URL would go here. And that user, that developer could go, you know what, when I was interviewing, I actually remember them asking me about things like e-commerce. Let me see if there's e-commerce here. Okay, and I got to go to all, but now I see there's an e-commerce backer. And that e-commerce backend has dependencies. And I, as a software developer or a system specialist or an operations person, can find out everything about this system. I can even drill down on it. I can look at its dependencies by double-clicking into them. And I can just kind of navigate around the system. This just takes one little YAML file, added to all your Git repositories that are then imported into Backstage with Red Hat Developer Hub, and now you have this magical superpower. This alone is a massive win for many organizations that can't find all their stuff. It's in a Git repository someplace, we just don't know where. But now that I know the Git repository for these components, and again, I can see it here in the catalog, I can then understand where their source code is. I can view their tech docs. Let's click here into tech docs, which is just a markdown file. That's feature number 2 of Backstage. And I can understand how I might contribute, how I might actually use this technology. Maybe I might actually call that service. But all that is part of the power. There's RBAC capability, role-based access. There's an orchestrator for doing more advanced kind of provisioning. But that is already a big win. I created those apps you just saw using this technology. As a matter of fact, I specifically used this thing called the Golden Path template. And the Golden Path template means that I'm going to basically git clone a repository. And here, I'll just hit choose real quick. And we'll call this thing the Burr bot, for lack of a better term. Okay? And the nice thing about a Golden Path template, it takes advantage of something called Argo CD as the technology behind it. But the template can be anything. And it can be a simple Java-based application, a Python application, a JavaScript application, or it might even be an application that talks to a large language model where we provision everything you need to build out a holistic software and large language model application. So if I, let's say, pick Granite or Llama, I can pick Carousel and Struct, whatever I might want there, hit Next, okay? Put it in Quay, put it in GitLab. I don't have to finish this. Let's actually go ahead and just look at one that was already done, right? So let's just go grab one that's already done. Let's go over here. Here's the GitLab rendering of it. And come on, GitLab, open up for me. There we go. So that's the sample code that went in there. But it also created a GitOps directory. And in this GitOps directory, it was the provisioning of all the infrastructure associated with this. All right, that's Argo CD, Helm charts. Here's the application set of Helm charts. If you're familiar with the deployment YAML, service YAML, things like that, that is traditional Kubernetes. But also it might have inside the Helm charts like AI infrastructure. And that would include things like the serving runtime. If I come over here to, serving runtime, you can see that's going to be the VLLM serving runtime. So even the artifacts which make up the infrastructure are declarative and actually set in Git. That's the powerful Argo CD. That's the superpower you gain. And when all that's stored in Git, it then has to sync up and deploy all that. As you can see here, it's been deploying different applications for me. And that means now I have not only an application provisioned in the catalog with the tech docs with everything I need, but also I can see its CI/CD pipeline. In this case, this used the Red Hat Trusted Application Pipeline I showed you guys last year when I was here. It scans for CVEs. It builds a test and signs that image. You can tell that the build and test is here, the attestation, the signature, the SBOM, the software bill of materials. So all your secure supply chain best practices are implemented here, and again, using Argo to roll it out into a dev, stage, or production environment. But it goes beyond that. And this application, by the way, is just this one right here, okay? Well, actually, not that one. Let's actually make a change to it real quick. So I've already downloaded it here. I've done my git clone. Let's bring up my Visual Studio Code, okay? And let's bring up my Quarkus, or runtime. This allows me to edit, save, refresh. Let's call this thing AI Chuck, right? We'll make this one Chuck Norris also. I'll show you how that's done. Let me go over here and grab one of my personalities. There's known as a system message and a user message. I like AI Chuck. Yeah, let's get AI Chuck here. And boom, boom, boom. It's simple to basically personalize your LLM in a very generic way. By default, it knows generic information like hiring a student and putting him to work, but now I can specialize a little bit. Let me hit save there, and I think I did that correctly. Let's see, we'll test it locally. Well, why did the chicken cross the road? Okay, let's see if I get that right. And we can look here because Chuck Norris was on the other side. I love Chuck Norris. He gives you great responses. But again, I'm just writing code. I'm just editing, saving, refreshing. And if I like that code change, I can git commit. All right, AI Chuck. And I can git push. And that sends it in to the CI system, everything you saw earlier. If I come back over here now, and let's look at our CI tab, we should see a new pipeline kicked off. So it'll build the image, sign it, attest to it, SBOM it, roll it out through Argo CD. So from git commit to production in seconds. All right? Technically, it's about 2 minutes to actually do all that. But basically, you're pushing it right through. A couple of things, and I know I need to finish up here. Just to show you that's the chatbot example. Actually, let's do this real quick. Let's have a little fun. You guys want to run AI Check yourself? Go to that QR code. Okay? Because I'm running this in a big cluster. What I'm running it on is actually a cluster with a bunch of worker nodes and has 5 GPUs associated with it. If I come over here, I'm going to make my screen a little bit smaller so you can see both things at the same time. Okay? But this is my cluster console back here, and I'm running a system with several worker nodes and GPUs associated with them. Like here, I have NVIDIA GPUs in the system, like this one right here. And therefore, it can schedule the large language models onto a machine that can actually serve it quickly and well. All right, so you can interact with AI Chuck. And the last little bit I'll show you, because I definitely am out of time at this point, is if I come back over here, I mentioned that there's a software development lifecycle, which we're now seeing. There's also a model development lifecycle, which is displayed here as Red Hat OpenShift AI, which provides the workbench for that project, including a Jupyter Notebook environment where I can do all the Python work that I would like to do. So in this world, I'm really dealing with Python, and I can run the pipelines that will validate and test the model for me over there. Like maybe I want to come over here, and I want to look at the confidence pipeline as an example, and just execute it and run it. Okay? I can do all of that from the model development lifecycle perspective and have the full software development lifecycle as well. Full model serving, again, using VLLM. Let's let it pop up there. So yeah, it'll come online here in a second. But back over here, and if we look at our server runtime, if I go to models and go open that up, you will see that it's a VLLM server with so much memory, so many cores, and that it's GPU accelerated so it runs quickly. And if I actually go tail the logs right now, you would see it going through its process of starting those models up. Just in another pod, all running within the context of this one cluster that you guys also got access to just now. Do you guys get AI Chuck going? Anybody get it going? Did it give you a good answer? All right, all right. Okay, I'm totally over time, so let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. One last little tidbit I'll give you is the concept of don't be afraid of technologies. If people tell you that you should worry about this, we shouldn't touch it, I don't want to touch it just yet, I want you to go back to the 1990s for a second. If you were a software professional in the 1990s, you had to go to the bookstore to learn a new technology. You cannot learn about a technology through this thing called the internet. It was not available unless you had like a bulletin board and maybe used America Online. But you had to go to a bookstore and you would find out what was there based on the bookshelf. And if you were a little bit more savvy, you might have had a magazine like Power Builder versus SQL Windows and Visual Basic, and you would learn about technology that way. If you fast forward just 10 years to the 2000s, you might have started using something like Google, Stack Overflow, Reddit, and YouTube. So what I'm suggesting now in the 2020s and beyond, you're going to use new tools. And that's going to be ChatGPT or Gemini, Stability, Copilot, Perplexity. One of these new tools is going to enter your world. And it should. You should talk to ChatGPT every day just to see what's going on. Okay? And more importantly, any of the technologies you just heard me talk about, you want to learn more about them? Like, what is a large language model? What does it mean to actually do fine-tuning? How do I use LoRa fine-tuning, L-O-R-A? I just heard that term. How do I find out more information about building a microservice? ChatGPT will educate you on those things. How do you think I learned these things? Okay? So it's an incredibly powerful tool. I'd encourage you all to give it a try because it's good for you as a software professional. Even if your boss says, you know what, we don't use tools like that around here. Tell the boss to say, well, you don't want me to use Google either or Stack Overflow. You're going to make me go back to the bookstore, which no longer exists, by the way. No, you're not going to roll back time, okay? Why don't we go back to the calculator and the abacus while we're at it? It's the nature of the tool. Take advantage of it. All right. So let's wrap things up. One more powerful image here that you can see that, again, she had a lot of fun on that Friday night, coming up with some stuff, and even kind of made it jump off the screen for me here. But one last crank at the slides. Feel free to access them. And I will be available after this session to answer questions. And where's Frederick? Did he still here? All right. So thank you so much for all your time today.
Fantastic.
Almost on time.
Yeah, almost on time. You were on fire. We saved some on the stage fire. So thank you. I know I'm between you and some drinks and snacks on the other side of those doors. So what's the saying? It takes two to tango. You can also gather 700 people, focus on innovation, collaboration, knowledge sharing. That's one heck of a tango. So from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of Red Hat, thank you for not only showing up, thank you for all the contribution. And on the other side of that door, you have snacks and drinks. Thank you.